This video from a South Seattle coffee stand, Taste of Heaven Espresso, is getting a lot of attention.
Women are allowed to respond when there is danger in ways other than crime.
She says he was complaining about the price, even though he's a repeat customer.
For a customer to get out of a vehicle in any sense, but especially to threaten, to argue, to any of those things, is so wildly inappropriate. The conversation needs to change from what did she do to deserve that to why did he think that that was at all appropriate. He refused to leave until the cops came. I've talked to now 3 or 4 different officers. No one has said a single thing to me about what I've done. It's all been about let's try our hardest to keep him away.
It's commonly known that a person's reaction to danger often leads to one of the 3 Fs: fight, freeze, or flee. In other words, it makes sense that some people instinctively attack when are frightened in a haunted house or are startled. No one is surprised when the reaction to something scary is to run away from it or to freeze in terror. These responses are found across the animal kingdom, and as Dario Maestroepi writes in Psychology Today, this response is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that deals with automatic functions such as breathing. Under stress, this system is activated, increasing heart rate and blood pressure, hastening breathing, and otherwise readying you to face down your enemy or to run. Typically reduced to the fight or flight response, a 4th reaction, fawning, has only recently been widely publicized. Alex Woodward of The Conversation describes this reaction as occurring when a person is being attacked in some way and they try to appease or placate their attacker to protect themselves. He notes that fawning is also observed in people who are in situations of interpersonal violence, such as domestic violence, assault, or kidnappings, when the person needs to appease or calm a perpetrator to survive. Fawning is also different to the other F responses in that it seems to be a uniquely human response.
If one of your go-to trauma responses is the fawn response, the way this might show up during conflict is that you might say whatever is required in order to make the conflict go away as quickly as possible, whether or not you mean what you say, and whether or not you're actually able to fulfill the commitments that you're making in that moment. So let's say that the thing that's needed in that moment is for you to escalate your commitment to a person. So you say it because you want the conflict to go away. But then later on, you're not able to actually fulfill that commitment, thus making the conflict even worse. So if you're somebody that goes towards a fawn response, the thing to ask yourself in that moment is, am I actually going to be able to follow up on the promises that I'm making because I feel scared and I want this conflict to go away right now?
As a result, fawning is far more commonly reported in women than in men, though typically referred to more broadly as the tend and befriend response to threats. Now, if a woman is threatened, how is she expected to react? She's expected to run away, to cry for help, or to freeze in terror, and yet she's criticized for not fighting back hard enough if she does any of those things. In contrast, a man is expected to fight in response to perceived threats. A reliance on this reaction fuels the claims that women need men to protect them. In this case, biology does play a large part in human behavior. As reported on Psychology.com, a 2012 Australian study found that the Y chromosome has produced proteins which contribute to the release of large amounts of norepinephrine in the bloodstream and the increase in blood pressure and motor activity occurring after stress in men, which in turn facilitate the expression of the fight or flight response. Women tend to have lower testosterone, and thus, when threatened, tend to their offspring and tend to befriend others to work together for the goal of safety. However, not all women have low testosterone, and not all women choose the docile reaction when faced with a threat. We're supposed to be kind when threatened. We're supposed to take the decimation of women's spaces placidly and play by the rules we've been restricted to play by over the years. We're supposed to keep following the law, to keep listening to the rules which avoid punishing those who deserve it most, and to keep our mouths shut about it all the while. Because obviously, verbalizing female rage is more of a danger to a modern and just society than those who create the threat to begin with.
That's not how this works. Commenting about male socialization is not the same thing as male socialization. And the idea that anything that someone says justifies the abuse that happens to them is very victim blaming. I don't think that anything an individual can say justifies violence towards them, or what they wear while we're on the subject. If you're looking to find reasons to hate women on my page, you will find it because I don't coddle male feelings. I don't believe your feelings are more important than actual women who have suffered. If you can be offended out of your allyship, you were never a real ally to begin with. Talking about violence does not create more violence. If you have an issue with women calling out the violent things that men do, then you need to address the men committing those violent acts, not tone police victims. You're in my comments generalizing all the women that respond to you, but saying, don't generalize me. Someone's generalization of an oppressive group does not justify your hatred as a member of that oppressive group towards them, a member of an oppressed group. I feel like I can't dumb it down any further, but you can never make things too dumb for you.
This is nothing new. Audre Lorde wrote of the presentation of the anger of black women as a threat by those who benefited from or participated in dialogues of racism in her 1984 collection, Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches. For it is not the anger of black women which is dripping down over this globe like a diseased liquid. It is not my anger that launches rockets, spends over $60,000 a second on missiles and other agents of war and death, slaughters children in cities, stockpiles nerve gas and chemical bombs, sodomizes our daughters and our earth. It is not the anger of black women which corrodes into blind, dehumanizing power, bent upon the annihilation of us all unless we meet it with what we have, our power to examine and to redefine the terms upon which we will live and work, our power to envision and to reconstruct, anger by powerful anger, stone upon heavy stone, a future of pollinating difference and the earth to support our choices. But it has never been acceptable to be a minority angry at your oppressors, but perhaps in the past it was a more simple opposition. One might oppose desegregation, but it was never under the guise of being a proponent of racial equality.
I am a non-binary trans activist, and this is an article from the Washington Post. And it's about whether using language like people who can be pregnant instead of saying women, whether that is bad for feminism or not. And I just want to add something personal to the mix. In the past week or so, I've been accused, personally me, of ruining feminism, ruining sports, ruining schools, ruining gender, ruining society. The list goes on and on. When LGBTQ people are blamed for every darn thing, it's a bad sign for a society and a culture and a democracy. If you are an inclusive feminist, thank you so much. You are important.
Trans women who have undergone male puberty are now banned from competing in women's international cricket matches. On Tuesday the 21st of November, the International Cricket Council confirmed its new gender eligibility regulation. The new rule states that male to female participants who have undergone male puberty will not be eligible to compete in the International Women's Game. In a statement, the ICC Chief Executive Jeff Allardyce said, "Inclusivity is incredibly important to us as a sport, but our priority was to protect the integrity of the International Women's Game and the safety of players." Cricket is the latest sport to ban trans women from international games, following in the footsteps of cycling, swimming, and athletics.
However, today, one can be blatantly misogynistic, racist, or homophobic, and yet still claim to be liberal by using the correct language. Thus, a fear of sexual assault and predation by allowing men and women spaces becomes transphobia and hatred, similar to that of racial segregation.
Men, including those that identify as transgender, commit acts of sexual violence. Every single piece of research, including our government's research, has shown to the same extent, in the same pattern as do men that don't involve, that have not undergone any form of gender reassignment, including those that socially transition. And I think it's an absolute obscenity that we put the so-called rights of men who just identify as women, when we know they're not. Every single person listening to this knows they're not women, above the rights and the well-being of women who are already vulnerable enough.
But this is how the dialogue has changed, hasn't it? And I think this is a question that Nicola Sturgeon and some of her supporters have sort of failed to answer. Who is it who decides, ultimately, the identity of any given person? Because there will be trans people watching this who consider you a TERF, who consider you a bigot, as Sturgeon has described you, and J.K. Rowling and others, who say, look, if this man identifies as a woman, then you are eroding his human rights, you're eroding his right to be seen equally to womankind.
I don't care. Men, trans-identified men already have rights. They have men's rights. I do not care if they're offended, and I also don't care if any man wishes to use a female name, wear a skirt, and claim that he is a woman. Let him. Fill your boots. But he's not. And we know, all women know, that the only reason why we have single-sex spaces and sex-based rights in law and policy is because of men's violence. If men stop raping and killing us, if men stop beating us in relationships, stop being a danger, stop posing a danger, we won't care. It doesn't matter. Until that day, then we have to have our own facilities in order to protect the most vulnerable of us from men's violence.
Telling a predator what a piece of shit they are, no matter how kindly worded, becomes an unmistakable act of xenophobia or racism, but sexual and violent threats towards women by trans-identified males are merely jokes that should be ignored.
Former swimmer Riley Gaines was physically assaulted following a speech to students about saving women's sports. As Gaines's husband, Lewis Barker, shared, the attacker was a man in a woman's dress. He hit her several times, after which the frightened Gaines barricaded herself in the room. She was also ambushed by trans activists who yelled at her as police escorted Gaines to safety.
What better examples of rules number 4 and 10 of misogyny? Women's opinions are violence against men, and thus male violence against women is justified, and the worst thing about male violence is that it makes men look bad. No care for the other women and girls they will undoubtedly go on to harm. No, of course, because the fact that a woman was angry was of a greater concern. Female rage is supposed to be in vogue. As a variety of depictions of women getting revenge and expressing rage have shifted away from the inherent villainization of women who do fight back to a more sympathetic portrayal, that sympathy ends when it's real. In a fantasy, a man can be assured that the victim of female rage truly deserves it, that he's not one of his friends. And of course, the film is sure to portray the perpetrator/victim in an unflattering light, wherein even if the male viewer can sympathize with the character, he knows better than to admit it. However, as a class, the idea of being called out for misogynistic behavior is uncomfortable. To be actually punished for it is unthinkable. There is a discomfort in personal growth, and particularly in giving up privilege and acceptance for the sake of another group. When faced with the possibility of repercussions for actions that are labeled as wrong, but often implicitly supported, it creates a discomfort that both men and women recognize even if it's left unsaid. As Blumbo McSwaggins so aptly put it in his article, Not All Men, Why Do Men Feel the Need to Defend Themselves? When vulgar assaults are carried out by powerful men against vulnerable women, such as those accused in the Me Too movement, it can force a horrible moment of introspection. In other words, a question arises. What separates me from the men in the news? Furthermore, whereas images of violence against women are normalized and often sexualized, violence against men, even as mild as verbal altercations and thrown drinks, oppose the gendered expectations for conflict resolution and general behavior. When women get violent, and again, that is often an overstatement, they change the status quo in a way that is hard to reconcile with the behaviors men and women alike have adapted and grown used to. This is why it's hard for many men to support cases like Lorena Bobbitt Gallo, whose decision to cut off her abusive husband's penis remains a spectacle of true crime to this day. This is why cases of women abusing male children receive a disproportionate amount of attention in comparison to the number of cases of sexual abuse perpetrated by a man. This is why the women who mildly reproach or border on rudeness when dealing with trans-identified men or trans activists are viewed as uniquely evil. What it all comes down to is an expectation that women will keep the peace, even if men choose to break it, that women will sacrifice and keep silent to do so, and so any deviation is viewed as an aberration, and worse, as unkind.
If you see a turf, punch him in the face!
I ain't gonna be the one that lets that arrest be in vain now. You heard her, we got some fists to throw. Let's go, come on.
Well, women have no obligation to be kind in the face of a threat, and obviously, kindness is yet to work as a manner of preventing abuse. It would rely on those who present the threat deciding to cooperate, and why the hell would they, when blundering forward and demanding their way seems to work so well? This, dear viewers, is where we part. I used to work at a rape shelter as a victim advocate, and it remains one of my most impactful jobs I've ever had. I was very, very glad to have been able to make a difference to so many people. But I also knew that cases would come through, and they would go through the re-traumatization of having to detail all this to people, to have to go through the kit, and most of the time, the men who did this, no matter how much evidence there was, even if they got prosecuted, which often they wouldn't spend much time in jail. I just don't understand how anyone can pretend that this is okay. There's essentially it's essentially like a rich person getting a parking ticket. To them, that $30 is like 3 pennies, and so it's just a fee you have to pay to do what you want. And I think in many ways, the way that we treat rape in the justice system is the same way. You might have to pay a small fee, a small fine. You spend some time in jail, but not very long, and you get on with your life. And until we change that, we're not going to see cases like this go anywhere. Anyhow, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can let me know in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.